The outcome of the 2024 U.S. presidential election may grab headlines, but one thing is certain. The national debt is set to skyrocket regardless of who takes office. Economists are already sounding the alarm, predicting that the cost of proposed economic measures by the parties could add $15 trillion in additional debt for the country over the next decade. But what exactly are these policies, and how did we get to this tipping point?
So both candidates, based on what they say they want to do, only going to push the debt upward.
Which is probably why we haven't heard a heck of a lot about it from either candidate, too.
No, you won't.
In this video, we'll take a deep dive into the fiscal landscape shaping the U.S. economy, exploring the key proposals from both major political camps. On one side, we have calls for expansive social programs and increased taxation. On the other hand, substantial tariffs, especially targeting China, and tax cuts are on the table. But what are the long-term consequences of these policies and the debt associated with them? Could it lead to higher inflation, rising interest rates, or even a ripple effect across the global financial system? So let's see if there is any way out of this growing fiscal hole. And what does this mean for everyday Americans? First, let's take a look at how we got here. Just recently, the U.S. national debt crossed a staggering $35 trillion. This is a significant jump that has experts and citizens alike growing concerned. This increase, largely driven by pandemic-related spending and ongoing economic challenges, has pushed the national debt to over 122% of the U.S. GDP. To put that into perspective, before the pandemic, this figure was around 106%. The scale of this increase suggests that something big is brewing, and it could spell trouble for the future of the U.S. economy. One of the most pressing issues with this rising debt is the cost of servicing it. In the last fiscal year, the U.S. shelled out nearly $892 billion just to cover interest payments. Even more concerning is that, without corrective action, debt servicing costs are projected to reach nearly $13 trillion over the next decade, reaching $1.7 trillion per year by 2033. Just think about it. Trillions of dollars will go solely toward interest payments, diverting critical resources away from essential areas like healthcare, education, and infrastructure. The consequences could be severe, and if nothing changes, this financial burden could drastically reshape the nation's economic landscape. So what are Trump and Kamala proposing? Well, I can say that in any scenario, the situation doesn't look promising. Analysts are saying the same thing.
On what exactly a Harris presidency, a Trump presidency would mean for the national debt, doesn't sound like it means anything positive here under both.
The cost of living has risen very significantly in recent years, but it seems this high cost will soon become the burden of the federal government, which will inevitably lead to more debt. According to recent surveys, a substantial portion of the population, around 41%, identifies inflation as their top economic issue for the 2024 presidential election. This concern is shared across party lines, although it is more pronounced among Republicans at 56% compared to Democrats at 28%. The effects of inflation are felt in various aspects of life, from the rising costs of groceries and fuel to increased expenses for housing and healthcare. Even those with higher incomes are adjusting their spending habits due to inflation. This widespread impact has led to a general sense of economic pessimism, despite some indicators suggesting a post-pandemic recovery. Given this backdrop, tax cuts have emerged as a prominent campaign promise from both major political parties. For example, former President Donald Trump has proposed a series of tax cuts, including making the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act's individual and estate tax reductions permanent, reducing the corporate tax rate, and removing taxes on Social Security benefits. Meanwhile, Vice President Kamala Harris has pledged not to raise taxes for individuals earning under $400,000 annually and to tackle corporate price gouging. These promises aim to alleviate the financial burden on Americans by reducing their tax liabilities, thereby increasing their disposable income. While everyone likes to pay less taxes, most people are not asking the very important question of where the government will get all the money needed to afford to give out these tax cuts. Vice President Kamala Harris has laid out her ambitious new way forward for the middle-class agenda, a sweeping policy platform that promises to expand tax credits, provide greater support for children and families, and slash costs in essential areas such as healthcare and housing. On the surface, these proposals may seem like a much-needed lifeline for middle-class Americans. However, there's a darker shadow looming behind these plans, a risk that is often ignored in the political discourse: the potential explosion of federal debt. In her CBS interview, she was asked how she plans to fund all of these initiatives.
You want to expand child tax credit. You want to give tax breaks to first-time home buyers.
Yes.
And people starting small businesses.
Correct.
How are you going to pay for that?
My economic plan would strengthen America's economy. His would weaken it.
But pardon me, Madam Vice President, the question was, how are you going to pay for it?
These policies are expected to add between $5 trillion to $10 trillion to the national deficit from fiscal years 2026 to 2035, creating a financial burden that could quickly spiral out of control. This is more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's a ticking time bomb that could threaten the stability of the U.S. economy. Harris aims to balance some of the costs through higher taxes on corporations and wealthy individuals, aligning with the revenue-raising measures in President Biden's fiscal year 2025 budget. Yet even with these increases, her plans would still fall significantly short of fully covering the expenses. Estimates show that these tax hikes would reduce deficits by only $3 to $5 trillion, leaving a gap of over $3 trillion. So what's the result? A 133% debt-to-GDP ratio by 2035, a dangerous 8% jump from the current trajectory. This scenario brings with it a litany of risks, including soaring interest rates, stunted economic growth, and, at worst, a fiscal meltdown that could cripple the nation's ability to meet its basic obligations. Former President Donald Trump, meanwhile, is pursuing a radically different yet equally precarious course. His 20-point plan and recent policy announcements focus on large tax cuts, higher spending on national security, and trade protection measures. The core of Trump's fiscal plan includes expanding and modifying the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, along with new ideas like making overtime income tax-free and ending taxes on Social Security benefits. While these proposals are popular with his supporters, they come with a huge cost. Experts estimate that Trump's tax cuts alone could increase the national deficit by anywhere from $7 to $15.6 trillion over the same period, with a likely impact around $10 trillion. And the spending doesn't stop there. Trump's agenda includes substantial investments in defense, healthcare, and long-term care, compounding the strain on the national debt. Under his central estimate, the U.S. debt could skyrocket to 142% of GDP by 2035, a 17% increase over the current projections. Imagine what such a debt load could mean for the American economy. Diminished confidence in the U.S. dollar, skyrocketing borrowing costs, and a dwindling capacity to fund essential public services. In the worst-case scenario, Trump's plan could push debt levels up by more than $15 trillion, setting the stage for a potential financial crisis of unprecedented proportions. As dramatic as these numbers may seem, they are not mere speculation. Both Harris and Trump's proposals come with an array of uncertainties that could tip the fiscal scales even further into dangerous territory. Many of their policies lack specific details, and the economic landscape may react unpredictably to their implementations. Behavioral responses, such as tax avoidance or shifts in workforce patterns, could drive deficits higher than anticipated. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget offers a range of cost estimates, and the potential for fiscal disaster cannot be ignored. The stakes are high. The U.S. is already grappling with record levels of national debt, and the next administration will face a harsh fiscal reality. Implementing either of these plans without careful, rigorous oversight could push the nation past the point of no return. The growing debt burden would limit the federal government's ability to respond to future crises, whether that be a recession, a public health emergency, or the need for critical infrastructure investments. Interestingly, the U.S. national debt has ballooned to an unprecedented $35.8 trillion, a figure so vast it becomes difficult to truly grasp. In just the past 3 weeks alone, it surged by an additional $473 billion, a pace that is both shocking and unsustainable. But why does this matter? The rapid rise of our federal debt is not just an abstract number on a government ledger. It's a ticking time bomb that could soon shake the very foundation of the American economy. And yet, its growing shadow seems to drift past us unnoticed, overshadowed by more immediate concerns. The implications for every American are real: higher taxes, diminished social programs, and a future where the U.S. economy could teeter on the brink of collapse. This is regardless of political promises being made, because the effect of this accumulating debt cannot be swept away. So, what are the driving forces behind this alarming trend? One of the main drivers is the relentless increase in interest payments. In 2024, these payments will exceed an astounding $1.2 trillion. This means that each American will effectively pay around $3,500 just to cover the interest, not the principal of the national debt. It's as if the U.S. has taken on a national mortgage it can never fully repay, with interest costs that continue to mount. This ongoing cycle is bearing the country under a massive pile of financial obligations, with no foreseeable relief. Another significant factor is the ever-increasing costs of healthcare and Social Security. With an aging population demanding more from these services, the financial strain has reached a breaking point. Millions of Americans rely on these systems, yet their ongoing costs are driving the country deeper into the red. As more people retire and live longer lives, the burden on these safety nets will continue to grow, pushing the debt higher and higher. But what does this mean for the future stability of our economy? The repercussions of this runaway debt are already seeping into the broader economy. One of the most insidious effects is inflation. As the government borrows more money is pumped into the system, eroding the value of the dollar and driving prices up across the board. This isn't some distant theory. It's the reason you've seen your grocery bills skyrocket and why every dollar in your pocket seems to buy less and less. Meanwhile, the government's relentless borrowing is squeezing out private businesses, a phenomenon known as crowding out. This drives up borrowing costs, making it harder for companies to secure funds for growth. Entrepreneurs, innovators, and job creators are finding it increasingly difficult to access the capital they need. If this trend persists, the long-term vitality of the economy could be at serious risk, and this issue only scratches the surface of the broader financial challenges ahead. As the debt grows, interest rates also start to rise. While this might seem abstract, it directly impacts every American. From mortgages to student loans, from car payments to credit card interest, the cost of borrowing rises for everyone. If this trajectory continues unchecked, the future looks grim. The Congressional Budget Office, CBO, projects that the national debt could swell to $50 trillion within the next decade. That's $50 trillion in obligations hanging over the heads of future generations, our children and grandchildren. This isn't just a policy problem, it's a moral one. What kind of economic world are we leaving behind for them? This explosive growth in debt is unsustainable. If investors lose faith in the US government's ability to manage its finances, the consequences could be catastrophic. The stability of the US dollar, and by extension the global financial system, could be thrown into chaos. Imagine a world where the US government is seen as a financial risk. What happens when the world's most trusted economy becomes unreliable? So why, despite all these clear warning signs, is this issue largely ignored? The national debt problem is like a slowly approaching hurricane. It's building up but hasn't struck yet. It's easy to focus on immediate, painful issues like unemployment, healthcare, and education. But as these short-term concerns take priority, the long-term consequences of uncontrolled debt growth are darkening the horizon, unnoticed until it's too late. Are we truly prepared for the financial cliff that awaits? Or are we sleepwalking toward a disaster of our own making? So while campaign promises may sound appealing, the US will have to pay a hefty price no matter who is elected. But here's something you can do for free. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching until the end. See you in the next video. Bye everyone.